You know, if you're going to find out, you know, one of the most important things that everybody is supposed to be able to do, and I think on your power window problem and everything that Price demonstrated troubleshooting techniques,
He did.
you know, and way to, you know, fix stuff without having to buy parts and all that kind of stuff. That works. You know, it works sometimes, sometimes it don't. But when I love it when it works because it makes you feel like you accomplished something.
Saved me $120.
Yep. It's always been interesting to me how a set of jumper cables can look so good and be so dysfunctional. You can have good look. Yeah, just crummy jumper cables that look really, really good. I stopped several years ago to visit a friend of mine, and I found him and his teenage boy out there trying to start a Massey Ferguson tractor. It was a diesel. And they had some jumper cables hooked up, and they had pickup running, had it speeding up and all. And I said, why don't you let me go get my jumper cables and let's get this tractor started? And the boy that was helping him said, oh, it ain't gonna make no difference. And so I went over there to my truck and I got my jumper cables, carried them over there and hooked them up, you know, like that. Oh, they're one some I built. I got a picture of them here. That's my pickup truck. There's the jumper cables right there. Yep. Yeah. Well, anyway, they had this pickup on fast idle with the cable connected, but when you hooked the same truck up to the same tractor with these big jumper cables, I had it fired it right off, and it was a diesel. And I built them when I was working down in southeast Texas. Our company had put in a brand new heliport, and there was a 40-foot piece left over of electrical cable that was about 3.5 inches thick, and the outside sheath was like triple alt wire or whatever. I mean, one red, one green, one black, and one white. And I made my dad a pair of jumper cables for his sawmill, and I made myself a pair. Now these clips cost $20 for a set of clips. You know, back in them days, that was a long time ago. But they're still in my toolbox. I still got them. And you can also get some good heavy welding lead and build you some good jumper cables. But what happened was, I was going to tell you a little bit about a parasitic drain issue on my 07 F-150. And what happened there, and that's the 07 F-150 right there, the gray one there at the top, that's my truck. And that's the fuse panel that you're seeing right there. And it just came out of nowhere. Suddenly there was a parasitic drain, and the only circuit that was leaking was, see this fuse right here? That's fuse number 21, as I remember, and it was feeding. It was the keep alive memory for the instrument cluster. Now, usually on those trucks, when they start killing the battery, the instrument cluster is what the problem is. But on this particular truck, I, had the battery up and charged up. It's got a good strong battery in it. If I leave it sit there a week and I get in it to drive it, it'd be as dead as a hammer. I mean, it wouldn't even burn a light. And so I said, well, I need to figure out what's going on here. So I hooked my, just like we were talking about parasitic drain yesterday, I hooked my meter up in series and gave it some time and all this. And when I pulled that fuse 21, every bit of the draw went away. And so, I spoke to Jimmy, the guy that I got, that I've trained for years ago. He's been working over at Ford place. He goes, usually the instrument cluster goes bad on those. So I unplugged the instrument cluster completely. Just unplugged both the wires going to the instrument cluster, let it set a whole week, because I had time to do that, since it's not like I was working on it in a shop. And it was still dead. And I said, well, I'm pulling this. And the fuse number 21, the only place that fuse goes is the instrument cluster. I unplugged the instrument cluster, it still goes dead. What's that telling you?
It's not that.
It's got to be in that box right there. So I bought that box. And see that box with them relays and fuses and all in it? It's pretty big deal there, Oh, heck no. I bought a new one from the Ford place. I went up there, told them what truck I had, and I bought a new one. All right, so what happened there was for about 2 months, I had no more trouble. And then it started doing it again, and I redid my troubleshooting, and this time the instrument cluster was bad. So I had to get one of those, So anyway, it was just a little bit annoying, but during the time that I wrote this, we've had a busy few weeks at the shop, and when things go the way they should, there's those jumper cables again. When things go the way they could, everybody learns stuff, and everybody here knows that. And this colleague of mine brought her son's 2007 Sierra to have it looked at with 3 concerns. To begin with, her husband had pulled the dipstick on it. It was a 5.3, and it was more than 2 quarts low on oil. But the oil had been fairly recently changed. I'm going to turn this back around. And the oil had been fairly recently changed, somewhere, and there wasn't any noticeable smoke, but nor there were any visible leaks. But he'd had to add 2 quarts, so they wanted to know what the deal was. Well, the second concern she had was that the wipers wouldn't work on intermittent, but were fine on low and high. This is an 07. It's a Sierra GMC. The third concern was that the cruise control didn't work. So I pulled the dipstick, found it to be over full to the tune of about 1 quart. Now he had pulled the dipstick and it was 2 quarts low, and he's no dummy, he knows how to check the oil. And he found it 2 quarts low. Then he poured 2 quarts of oil in it, now it's 1 quart over full. So we basically, sometimes on those trucks, the drain back from the valve covers, there's them holes where the oil that goes to lifters and all supposed to drain back, they'll get clogged up. And a lot of oil will be trapped up in there. So we pulled the valve covers off, and everything was clean as a whistle. Drove it for about 20 minutes, parked it, and checked the oil, and it showed full. I don't know, but whatever. But I told her to have her son keep a close check on it because he's going to college in a town that's a couple hours away from here, and just watch it. Be careful. What he did there, because if you don't find anything, there's no use in going in there doing a bunch of work, right? That's surgical. Surgical is whenever you try to figure out what's wrong. Now, I will tell you something that we did do yesterday that was surgical, but I could not verify the concern. The Dodge Caravan that the workforce development guy drives, he says, I drove it to Montgomery. I got about halfway to Montgomery and it quit cooling. He says, I parked in Montgomery after a road driving with the windows down. I came back about halfway from Montgomery. It cooled really good, and about halfway back it quit cooling again. Okay, Brian, you've been air conditioning training. What do you think?
What?
You drive it, he's not even listening, is he? You drive it, you've had air conditioning training. What are you thinking? It drives about maybe 75 miles, cooling really good, and then it just quits cooling. And it don't cool until he parks the truck. He switches the truck off, or the van, and then he drives about 75 miles on the way back, and it quits cooling again. And it doesn't cool the rest of the way back home. And I get in it, and I crank it up, and I pull it in here, it's cooling just fine.
Is the AC compressor turning off?
No, it freezes up.
No, he's getting plenty of airflow. I asked about that too. I mean, is it freezing up? The airflow was just beautiful. He said it's still blowing good and hard, right out of the registers where it's supposed to, but it's warm. It's not ain't cool at all.
But the AC compressor is engaging properly?
Well,
Or
that's the rub. I couldn't duplicate it, but when we checked the air gap on the compressor clutch, it was too wide. See what I mean? So what we did was we pulled me and Adam Napper, we pulled the screw out of the middle of the hub. That one's just got spline. You slide it off. There's some shims in there.
Oh, that's nice.
And he went and the shim was really thick on that one. Well, see, every time that clutch energizes, it does that. And I mean, it's going to wear off a little bit. I have no idea who that is. All right, so basically what we have here is a situation where we need to do something. Even though we've let it run all day and part of it out in the hot sun, it's never duplicated this problem, but we weren't driving down the road either. And we didn't have time to drive at 75 miles. So I just set the air gap to where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be 14 to 21,
What was
and it was up close to 30. So we went ahead and set the air gap, because when that coil gets hot and everything, they're going to pull in as much. In that situation, if you can catch it not doing it and you bump it with a screwdriver handle and it clicks in, you know what's wrong with it. See, everything was like it's supposed to be. It just wasn't pulled in. Anyway, that's a little surgical thing. You don't go in there and replace a whole bunch of parts and suck it out and put new fuse in there and all that kind of stuff, without you find out pretty much and that was a sort of an educated guess. Now, what did it cost to pull those out and put the shims, put a thinner shim in there? Almost nothing. See what I mean? How much are we spending? That's another thing I want to know about. I don't want to throw a whole bunch of parts at something like that. It's like the noise on the Camry that we'll have a chance to look at again next week. They take it to the Toyota place and they're hearing something that I know is not a CV axle. And they said, it's going to be $800, it needs a CV axle. I mean, what's the guy that says that got to lose if it's not, That's the whole thing. Yeah. But we're going to look at that. Anyway, so we hadn't seen this wiper problem before, so we scan tooled it. And while our tool said the range of intermittent wiper switch position should be 1 to 255, we were only seeing the switch output from 1 to 5. So I don't know where the 1 to 255 was going, because we had the the equivalent of GM scan tool in it. And Identifix said a lot about bad switches causing this problem. We got a switch from GM for $29. Didn't cost much. It didn't change anything, even though our scan tool data was telling us that it wasn't right. And, you know, it helped to have another truck for comparison. That's what they do at the dealer. You know, Joe's working on one just like theirs, and they say, let me plug a scan tool in for a minute, and they look at it and they see about it. And that's a good thing. What we found was that when we unplugged the rain sensor module, the wipers worked just fine on intermittent. It had a bad rain sensor module up there behind the mirror. Matter of fact, I got a picture of that too. Let's see. There, see that? See that rain sensor module? They wouldn't work on intermittent until we disconnected the harness from that rain sensor module up by the rear view mirror. And it's got a dandy plastic cover that's got to be removed for access, and it had everything it needed in the way of power, harness integrity, and everything, but it had gone bad.
Is that the
And she
Crossfire?
said, huh? No, that's not the Crossfire. That's a, well, the Crossfire is in this article. I'm going to be talking about it in a minute, but one way or another. So we went ahead and unplugged that. Well, now we're looking at the cruise control. And we verified that it didn't operate, and the data stream told us that the brake pedal activation had prevented it the last 4 times. The cool thing about cruise control nowadays, if you're checking cruise control, it'll say the last, you know, a lot of these, it's got really cool little things. It'll say the last 4 times that I quit working, it's because somebody hit the brake. Or the last 4 times I quit working, it's because somebody hit the off switch. Or because this, you know, we were going too slow when they tried to set it or whatever. But what we had there was, we had this on our scan tool. See that? See what we had on the scan tool there? If you look at it, that's actually a screenshot of that scan tool. And it said that it was a brake pedal circuit was applied. You see. So one of them saying release, the other was saying applied. And so what's going on is the doggone thing's figuring, for some reason or another, it's thinking that the brakes are mashed on it. So it's not going to let the cruise work. See, basically you're just trying to do that. Now we got a brake pedal switch and popped it on there, but that didn't do any good. It didn't cost much, but I put it on there and I checked the voltage. It was a come and go for some reason. Like you check it, it's there, it's not, it's there, it's not, it's there, it's not, even though you're holding, you know, right like it should. Well, we ran out of time. Sometimes that's, you know, sometimes you run out of time. That's just all there is to it.
Doesn't it have a cruise control module?
No, this thing's built into the engine controller and it uses the electronic throttle plate. You know, it's all built in there, and everything's got to do with the sensor. I mean, if the park brake's applied, it won't work. You know, if it thinks your brake's mashed.
A whole new ECM?
No, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't go there. You know, there's something wrong with that signal. I think we had a wiring problem between there, but we ran out of time. They had to go. Well, Gene always has his eyes and ears open for students with car trouble, and he saw one of our welding students side the road a half mile away from the college with the hood up on his 2004 Explorer, and he dragged it back. And I made a work order and had the driver sign it. So it would spin over, but there was no fire. I mean, in the hole, it wouldn't fire up, you know. So we had fuel pressure to key on. Remember what I told you about the no starts. If you've got fuel pressure, if the engine controller will turn on the pump, listen to this, it's important. If it'll turn on the pump, you know the PCM's awake. You know it's awake and doing things. All right, if you don't hear the pump and you don't have spark, I'm wondering if the PCM is asleep or not powered up or something's wrong with it. So basically, spark and fuel is where you're going to go with that. Now, if you got spark and you got fuel pressure, you're going to listen for injector pulse next, right? And so on and so forth. You go from there. Get used to that. I'm starting to throw you all some more no starts here. But anyway, so there was no security light flashing. You know, sometimes that'll keep them from starting, like passive anti-theft. And the scan of the data stream didn't produce anything except a big fat 0 on the RPM line. It didn't even have a trouble code. This is dead as a hammer. So we put it in the shop, and one of the students rolled under there on a creeper to have a look at the crank sensor, which had been destroyed because the harmonic balancer came apart. See that harmonic balancer right up there in the corner? Stand up, stand up, stand up and reach for it. I guarantee it's not as heavy as that bucket full of brake pads. That's it. Let me see it. It's a little heavy, but this is the balancer off of that vehicle. You know, the balancer had, this pulley had slid back off of its rubber and it had eat up the crank sensor, which is supposed to read off this bunch of notches right here. And what was funny about that was we fixed this one well, they brought us a balancer that they had from somewhere else. They got one off an old engine or something because they didn't want to spend $100 on a balancer. Well, the parts house, when I called and talked to them about the balancer, they just ordered one arbitrarily. And of course it came in and we didn't need it because they brought us another one. And we put a new crank sensor on it, and it fired up and really drove away, and everything was fine. Well, the 08 that you did the oil change on, remember yesterday? It came in here and she was saying the belt was squealing. Well, what happens when this pulley walks back, the belt walks onto this rubber. And suddenly it gets looser than it should be, and hers hadn't destroyed the crank sensor, but she was just a smidge away from it because it starts eating into the crank sensor when it slides back like that. And so we did 2 of these within 2 days on Explorers. One was an 04 and one was an 08. And if you look down there, and I got a picture of the, here, put that back where you got it. And, I got a picture of it, what it did to the crank sensor and all here that I'm going to show you. See that? See what's on the screen there? That's what it did to the crank sensor down here. It just chewed it all up. This belt, when you look down there, unless you know what you're looking at, you won't recognize the fact that the belt has come off of this and is riding on that rubber. And looking at it on the truck, it looks like it's right here, see? See that? And so, and there's the balancer we put on there, the replacement. And there's the one that came apart. Now, that's the replacement. That's that $100 one that we got from the parts store. And it's still on there, I guess. That's pretty good story there. But anyway, you know, that other Explorer Olivia's did the same thing. Now, you know, 2 weeks later, the Explorer showed up wanting a full set of used tires mounted on some rims he was pulling behind him. And, you know, he wanted to know how much it was going to cost. He wanted to know if we could get it done by 10 o'clock.
Nope.
This was 9 o'clock, and I told him, if you leave it with us, we'll get it. Well, anyway, he got disgruntled and drove off, and that was fine too. But there was this Crossfire that we worked on for a no crank concern about a year or before this was written. And you know, she took it to a dealer, and they had charged her $2,500, and it still sometimes wouldn't even spin over. You know, a Chrysler Crossfire is a Mercedes, basically. It's just a Mercedes, a little coupe is what it is. And this lady right here drives it. And so I hooked a little recorder that I had on it, and I made it so she could make a recording. A little recorder records 4 things. It's a strange recorder most people have never seen before, made by Hickok. And it would record injection, it will record ignition, it records battery, and it records 1 auxiliary. And I hooked the auxiliary up to the one that comes out of this little module. This little module right here. This little module right here on that thing has got a bunch of relays in it. And, you know, the part number is A175450305. And it's about $400 for this module. But whenever I connected to the, you know, hooked up to it to see if what was coming out was going to the engine controller, if the relay was powering up, you know, see all these wire terminals here? That's funky Mercedes stuff. The one going out to the engine controller, I made a good recording, and she made a bad one when it wouldn't start. And we put one of those on there, and she had no more trouble. And but I mean, it was because of that little recorder. I never would have known if it wasn't for that. And I've got that recording out there on one of them computers if you want to see it. But anyway, she said, I've also got a problem with it quitting while I'm going down the road. Okay, so she says, so she brought it in for that, and she didn't want to take it over and get charged $2,500 to $3,000 again. So I says, okay, let's take let's do what we can to figure that out. And we wasn't hard really. Melissa plugged the scan tool in and got a crank sensor code. So we pulled the crank sensor out, and we put it in a vise. You know, just gently put it in a vise, and we hooked our meter up to it, and it was reading 1,050 ohms. All right. While it's reading, that's right. That's what it's supposed to read. Don't believe it or not. Because see, she had to catch a ride up here because it quit up there, and so by the time they got it, and it went up back up there to get it, it cranked up and it drove back up here. And so we hooked that meter into that sensor, and we got a heat gun, and we heated it up just a little bit with a heat gun, and then it opened up. Remember that? You might have been here when that was going on. But anyway, when it opened up, I said, well, we'll get a crank sensor. It ain't no big deal. So I called the parts house. They sent me one of these Intermotor brand crank sensors, and it was $110. And I measured it, and it had 1,350 ohms. I said, well, it looks just like the crank sensor we got, but I don't like this reading. But let's put it in there just to see what happens, because it's easy to put in there. So we put it in there, and it fired up. And then the next time we went to start it, it wouldn't start. And then the next time it would. And it might start and it might not with that sensor in there. Never had that problem with the other one.
Was it getting enough?
It was not the right resistance on that sensor. It wasn't totally compatible, because it was sort of, they felt like there was a window that would be okay, and apparently it wasn't. So I said, send me another one of these. So he sent another one. It was 1,200 ohms, which was still 150 ohms more. And I put it in. It was about the same way. I said, I don't want this. I don't want this. So I went on Amazon and I bought one that was the right part number for $33. and we popped it in there, and she's driving it right now. You know, had 1,050 on them, just like we wanted. So anyway, just because the sensor looks right, don't mean it's, you know what I mean?
Yes.
You got to measure everything, double check it, and all that sort of thing. But anyway, she was happy about that. Well, that wasn't the end of that story. It was the end of the dying going down the road, but she said sometimes the battery would be dead. Well, that was a different thing than what she had both times before. So sit in half an hour and go again, and it's just a crazy thing. Well, anyway, that particular one turned out to have an alternator. And so, okay, so here's another no start. 2002 Saturn comes in behind a pickup truck, and it's a serious bomb. If we wanted to upsell, this one would work on it for weeks, but the guy wouldn't normally buy anything. You don't have to. So we had spark, we had fuel injection, but when I had one of the guys connect the fuel pressure gauge, he called me over here. He says, come over here to where I hooked up his fuel pressure gauge, and I said, all right. And so I went over there, and he says, this doesn't feel like gas. And so whenever he says, watch this, and he screwed it in there, and some stuff came out of my fingers, and it was really cold, And I said, that's alcohol. It's just about pure alcohol. And so we pumped we actually did a test on it to see how much of it was alcohol. Wasn't as much as you'd have thought. I got a picture of that too, I think, right there. See that? That's when we do in the test. Now, you guys have got a worksheet I handed out this week on finding out how much alcohol is in gas, right? Remember that? And this is how you do it. That's what it looks like when you got alcohol in there. And there's a picture of that crossfire I was talking about and all that. And the sensor connected and everything like that. But one way or another, it was all we did was we drained the fuel and put some good gas in it and got that one going in short order. We didn't do anything except drain the fuel and put gas in it. Fuel quality is really important. On this other one out here, this Mustang that we were looking at, the gauge was reading past full, but the gas that was coming out of there was greasy. Have you ever had gas?
That's old gas, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily. What it is it's gas that is almost gone, and back in the mid-'80s, they started putting something in gas called olefin. Olefin, diolefin, that kind of thing. And they were little black particles of stuff that were supposed to go whipping through the injectors and like sandblast the deposits off of them. And the only problem with that is they would trap some of those olefins when you shut the engine down, and they would get baked onto the injector by that hot engine, and they'd start to clog the injectors, and they'd also pile up on the intake valves and soak up the octane and make it cold-natured. It's a terrible mess. Furthermore, they weren't putting enough lubricant in the gasoline when they first started putting these high-pressure positive displacement fuel pumps in the tank, and they were wearing out fuel pumps because they didn't have enough of them. Well, now they put some lubricant in there. I haven't read this anywhere, but I know that the gas that I used to wash transmission parts in 1977 feels different on my hands than the gas I feel of right now, because I can wave this gas around now until it's dry, and I have greasy stuff on my hands. Doesn't smell like diesel, but I've got greasy stuff. What I was getting out of that Mustang the other day was greasy stuff. The gasoline evaporates and leaves the greasy stuff, and that's what I had was coming out of that fuel pressure gauge. And that's what got me thinking about the gas to begin with. See, and it's not going to run off that greasy stuff. That makes the fuel pump nice and slick inside, but it's not going to run off the grease. And we poured gas in it and fired it up. Of course, it's got another problem. I think he found a big air leak when he pulled the intake off. But one way or another, fuel quality is something you really, really need to be paying attention to. And you cannot trust the fuel gauge just because it says. Like, for instance, yeah, you had that happen on you? This lady called me one day and she says, my Explorer has quit out here by this church over here. And it's shameful because we had pulled the fuel pump out of it to do something to it. I can't remember. When they put it back in, you couldn't tell this had happened, but it fouled the float arm up at about the 3/4 of a tank level.
Yeah, you got to put it in a certain way.
Yeah, and that's what had happened. And so this lady was driving from Andalusia to Enterprise, and she was thinking she had lots of gas and was getting wonderful gas mileage because it was still on 3/4 of a tank after 3 trips. And then one day she's coasted over to the side of the road and she's got nothing. So I went out there and I got my meter and pulled the fuel pump relay out and hooked it up reading amps, and it was pulling 1.5 amps. And I said, you got no gas in here. And so we poured some gas in it, it fired up, and then we pulled the thing back out of the tank and fixed it where it would read right, That's what.
I want to do the same thing. I bought a brand new fuel pump offline, and it was the one that's all made together. It's in one unit, you can't change it. And it's got the meter on the side. And it said I had a half tank of gas, and I was coming from like, on the interstate from like Crestview to Puniac. I run out of gas like 16 miles before Puniac, I had to walk all the way to the gas station.
Yeah, it reminds me of one time when I ran out of gas when I had the money to buy gas and knew I was empty but wasn't paying attention to the game. But anyway, that was a long time ago. I told that story before. So anyway, so basically I've been driving my Taurus to work for Fuel Economy for a pretty good while. But I found the problem on the truck and bought the junction box and put it on there. That's basically how the thing in that. But on that other one, it had the fuel in it. I think she pumped some E85 in there or something. But one of the things you got to develop is you got to be able to develop the skill to figure out what's wrong without throwing a bunch of stuff at it. And it really drives people crazy whenever they want to be able to trust you. They want to be able to talk to you transparently, and you need to be prepared to tell them. Like for a lot of times what I'll tell them, I says, like on the throttle position sensor we put on that Mustang, I was telling, because you see the Mustang got mass airflow in 1989. Everything else that Ford had got mass airflow in 1990. And when they retyped the program for all the other engine controllers in 1990, they basically gave them data stream. But Mustangs didn't get data stream until 1994. That irritated the stuffings out of me, because you get used to data stream, you're hooked on it. Well, for years I had been back probing sensors and stuff and finding out what was wrong with them before we had data stream on Fords. 88 was the first year they had it on Ford with Continental. But anyway, here I am working on this thing, and I says, let's look at this is a mass airflow system. Second year they had it on here, and we checked the barometric pressure sensor. It's supposed to have 158 hertz at sea level. If it's reading higher than that, it'll run bad cold. Ran great. I mean, it was 158, like it's supposed to be. I said, now let's look at your TP sensor and see what it's doing. So I went into that green wire, and it's starting out at like a half a volt, and when you go wide open throttle, it was going to 2.5. It should be about 1 volt to 4.5 on a Ford. Now on GM, they start out at about a half a volt, but that ain't right on a Ford. 0.8 to 1 volt on a Ford is what I see. Their book says 5 to 1.5, and that's totally way off the reservation. But the point is, I said, we got a TP sensor, put that on there, and got that right where it was reading right. And I didn't feel bad about that because they needed it. When you categorically find something that's wrong, and I'm just about done here. And what I was going to tell you, there was a Renault. I went to school on those little Renaults whenever we got the Renault franchise when I was at Ford place. And one of the things they taught us at the school with the little ignition module, they said, one of these things quits going down the road, and it won't quit for you. Reach back here and mash on this potting material right where the wires go into that thing, because it's kind of soft, and see if that makes it stall. If it does, you need an ignition module. So I drove it, and it wouldn't quit. And I mashed on the potting material, and it died, and I sold him a $140 ignition module. Put it back out. Well, he came back.
That's a European vehicle, isn't it?
Huh?
A Renault.
Yeah, it was an Encore. Yeah, it's French. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. AMC was with him for a while. And I'm about a minute and a half from being done here. Well, the guy comes back and he says, this thing's still quitting on me. You sold me a part I didn't need. And I said, well, I followed factory procedure and found it stalling when I mashed the thing. I wasn't throwing a part on it that I didn't verify. Well, the crank sensor, which was only about $28, I hooked my meter up to it and drove it down the road. And I drove it a lot farther and a lot harder and a lot hotter. And whenever I got through, I was way off up the road and it quit on me. And that crank sensor opened up. So I put a crank sensor on it and fixed that one. But one day, and there was a funny little probe that I worked on. And that silly little probe was supposed to be quitting. I let it run in my service bay for a long time, and it just run and run and run and run and run. So I took off up the road, and I went to turn around in front of a movie gallery out on the traffic circle, and the stupid thing quits on me out there with all this heavy traffic going by, And so I checked it, didn't have any spark, and I said, well, that's probably that module distributor, but I ain't never seen that on one of these. So I got the windshield washer hose and pulled it off and propped it over there and went wing, cooled it off, boom, fired it up. Drove it back and put a $400 ignition module on it. Then you got to be creative, you know what I mean? That's kind of like what he was doing with the thing. Of course, what I did, I want a permanent fix, but it told me what was wrong with it. But everybody got good notes? Mm-hmm. All right. Remember this stuff. I mean, if you're not a surgical troubleshooter, somebody else needs to be doing the work. You got that? And so,
Ingenuity. Some of it.
Yeah, it is. A lot of it's in